Chapter 6. I didn't cry as I sat outside the sanctuary while everyone else ran to take cover. I didn't cry when Skylar paused her frantic run to laugh in my face. I didn't cry when Lucian tried forcing Celeste to join them in the sanctuary. I held the tears that threatened to spill. The moon would grace us soon. Goddess only knew what was going on as we sat outside at the foot of the stairs of one house. The decoration hanging from every porch didn't look happy anymore as they did during the start of the Feast of the Moon. The chirping birds seemed to carry a mournful tone with them. The darkening skies carried gloom with them. You still have time to join them, I told Celeste. I didn't want her out here with me where I would worry about her every minute. If she went into the bunker like everyone else, I'd rest easy knowing I was the only one risking my life by being out here. If you can't go in, I won't. She took my hand in hers, squeezing them. I laid my head on her shoulder, inhaling her natural sea scent. You'd be safe in there. Without her here, I would be sitting alone, feeling sorry for myself, yet I wouldn't trade her safety for my comfort. While you're alone out here, I can fight, but you can't stop flogging this issue. I'm not leaving my best friend out in a looming war because some douche canoes decided to be jerks. She bowed. Celeste had a soft, feathery voice which sounded funny when she got upset. At 5'6", no one called her short, but her height and size didn't intimidate anyone. Her innocent face and calm aura didn't help her case, but I didn't doubt for a minute that she would pick up a machete and charge into battle if she set her mind to it. What do you think is happening now? I whispered, closing my eyes. The moon's glow caressed my skin. At a normal time, we would be praying for the final ceremony of the Feast of the Moon as our shifters tore through the woods, but not today. He is here, she whispered back. Yes, the cursed Alpha Prince and his beta had arrived on our soil a few hours ago. There had been a subtle tilt in the balance of power on our land. Alpha Xavier stopped being the law and the supreme Alpha. With his power reduced, ours did too. It made us even more afraid. I perceived unfamiliar wolves all around me, the difference in the smell around our homes so startling that even my bad nose picked it up. Yes, we had invaders. I'm scared, I admitted to her, clasping our hands together. I hated my pack and what they did to me. I hated my Alpha. My allegiance to these people had waned over the years, dimming with each punch, each kick and each harsh word. My bond to the pack weakened over the years from being left out so much, but it didn't break. A thin thread connected me to these people so I could feel the anxiety we all felt as a pack, the dread of the unknown. Me too. Celeste squeezed our hands even tighter. One of two things happened when the Alpha Pack took over a pack: bloodshed. Change of leadership. None of which sounded pleasant to pack wolves. We sat in silence for a long time after that, our heads pressed together as the full moon got bigger and brighter. To our surprise, a few minutes later, we heard the Alpha call. From Alpha Xavier. I looked at Celeste. She looked at me. Her hands twitched in a minute, fur beginning to cover her skin. I have to go. When she spoke, she had more teeth than a human, jagged teeth with a mouth full of spittle. I released my grip on her and in a minute, she was tearing out of sight, shredding her clothes as she went. It left me alone a small distance from the pack house. Alpha Xavier wouldn't give up his rightful position without a fight. He had the right to rule Red Bull, earned it by blood. No one comes into another Alpha's territory to take from him without a fight. I just hoped this fight wouldn't be too devastating. No news media covered the events of an Alpha Pack's takeover, and historians liked to distort history to cover up a thing they didn't feel proud of. Only a few textbooks covered Prince Valens' life and exploits. Books that our schools banned. Some packs studied him, as I learned a while ago, but others felt as if uttering his name could conjure him. Red Bull taught the Prine's exploits as nothing more than myths and propaganda. I dusted off my clothes as I stood to return to the pack house. I couldn't sit out for too long. The howls of those partaking in the run reached my ears even from the distance I walked from. A lot happened since the start of this feast that it felt the drama came with it. It made me wish it would pass with it, but the rotation of the earth couldn't throw Prince Valens from our lands, unfortunately. Tomorrow we would wake to hear the verdict. Until then, I planned to sleep for a while with the hopes of the invaders not invading my space. I was happy to live in the basement then. The invaders already took over the pack house, but no one would want to stay in the cold basement. The house wasn't as I expected it to be. I didn't see any of the invading wolves around as I walked. No one stood outside the pack house to pray for a better feast of the moon next year, so it felt safe to assume only those who could shift and couldn't resist the Alpha's call had come out of the bunker to run. Why Alpha Xavier called for a run at this precarious time was beyond me. No matter how much he tried to make it seem as if everything was under control, we knew better. We felt the truth. The invaders hadn't taken over the pack house either. The rooms were empty, some askew as the owners rushed to flee the house, doors open and rooms empty. The pack house housed 70 wolves. It was never quiet. Not even at midnight when the boys liked to play video games and practice their dance moves. But this night the house was as quiet as a cemetery. I trudged down to the basement and went into the room I called mine. The basement seemed colder that night. Without the exhaustion of a full day of hard labor, I couldn't go to sleep. Many things ran through my mind, keeping me awake. How could I sleep when enemies had set up camp in the home I'd known all my life? The wolves ran now, hunting. Our Alpha may address us by tomorrow morning if the prince didn't mount his head on a spike in front of the pack house before then. What were their moves? What would be ours? I felt helpless here, out of the loop, rejected, an outcast. My traitor blood kept me out when my pack built a shelter for themselves. Celeste wouldn't return and it made me half glad and half sad. She would go into hiding with them after the run while I stayed out with the enforcers, the warriors, the Alpha and his beta. Those tasked with protecting Red Bull would do their protecting while keeping the pack members safe. The only outcast, me, would be caught in the crossfire. Minutes rolled into hours and when I couldn't sleep, I got out of the flat lump I called a bed, going up to the kitchen. I had to exhaust myself before I could sleep. The kitchen was as I left it, with washing water and a pile of clean and another pile of dirty dishes stacked inside. I started washing the plates with my heart in my throat. They didn't allow me into the sanctuary. I couldn't hide from the crossfire. I knew I couldn't hide, but my room in the basement felt safer than this kitchen on the ground floor with windows looking outside. My heartstrings played a violent, ear-splitting music when I felt the chill in the atmosphere as a being so powerful his very essence suffocated me, entered the pack house. My hands in the dishwater shivered, disturbing the water and making bubbles rise. I gasped when he entered, lowering my head before I made the mistake of looking into the soulless black eyes the myth said he had. Is there food in this house? His cool words reverberated with power. I nodded. He couldn't be talking to anyone else but me. Fix me something to eat. I nodded again, moving around the kitchen in haste to fix him something from the food we prepared for the final ceremony of the feast. Your pack is rude. I didn't dare look at him and I didn't dare disagree, so I nodded my head. The last pack I visited had people to greet me at the borders. They called them sacrifices, but it is the thought that count. I nodded again as he spoke. The food on the plate in my hand danced around as I placed it before him. What is your name, Omega? I raised my head a fraction, making the mistake of looking into his eyes. I gasped as pain seared me from inside out. My bones began to crack as I fled the pack house. Chapter 7. Latency meant I couldn't shift. I had a wolf trapped inside of me that wouldn't come out no matter how much I tried. My kind shifted at 18, with alpha wolves shifting earlier, at 17. I would be 20 in a few weeks, which meant for 2 years, I bore the stigma of being a traitor's daughter and that of a latent wolf. I couldn't shift until that night. Pain bloomed on every inch of my skin. Tiny pinpricks, sharp stabs, I felt them all at once as my body changed. Then the worst of them happened in my head, my skull. As if an external force pressed my skull together, I felt my head squeeze, my brain seemed to be crushed. It passed with excruciating slowness, my eardrums and eyes, nose, everything, changing all at once. If someone took a broken shard of glass and ran it into my eyeballs, they may not hurt as much as they did then. I hit the ground face first as I fell, my half-open mouth taking in sand and leaves. I hunched over, but when the second wave came, it hit harder than the first, devastating me from head to toe and reawakening the ringing in my eardrums. Something cold trickled out of my ears, my eyes, and mouth. It would be tears, sweat or snot. It could be blood. When I couldn't feel anything but the stabbing in my stomach, the banging in my head and the fire on my skin, I let the pain take over me. It washed over me like a tide and then caught in one or two places, unable to recede fully. My heart calmed after the panic of impending doom, but my bones continued to ache. I scrambled to stand, falling at least 5 times before I took a wobbly step forward, only to fall on my stomach again. Although I couldn't remember what it felt like walking for the first time as a child, I knew it wasn't much different from this. Albeit no one supported me or caught me when I fell. No one taught me to put one step ahead of the other, making me stumble much more. I had no guidance, no one to celebrate a shift I prayed for 2 years, no one to ask the color of my wolf or how it felt to shift. If I howled, no one would answer. If I cried, no one would care. You're choosing self-pity on our first shift. Seriously. Artemis didn't sound the least impressed at my silent lament. This is the happiest day of your life, second only to when we find our mate. She snapped at me while moving at a slow pace to avoid taking in a mouthful of dirt for the nth time. We already found our mate, remember? I found my mate on my 18th birthday, as most wolves do, but unlike most wolves, I didn't shift and my mate rejected me. Lucian was never worthy of us. We will find someone else. If mates were so easy to find, people would not be scrounging the earth to find theirs. Many people died without the privilege of meeting their other half, so what chances did I have of finding 2 mates in one lifetime? I spent the rest of the night exploring as a wolf, picking up scents that had gone unnoticed to my human nose and appreciating the beauty of the moon that washed over me and acted as a light to my path as I moved about the small woods close to the pack house. By the time I'd explored the ground to my wolf's contentment, by the time I'd successfully hunted a rabbit and made a mess, my wolf was ready to retire for the night. First shifts, I'd heard, were always the most difficult, and it left the body weak for hours afterwards. Exhaustion already made my eyes droopy and my body felt like a large sack of rocks that my tired legs couldn't hold up. I shifted back to my human form without being conscious, my body unable to hold my other form for much longer. Shifting back was another exercise in extreme torture where my body turned from wolf to human, snapping bones and sending shards of sharp stabs into all my organs, kicking me in the head and stealing the breath from my lungs as I gasped and gasped 10 times more. At the end of my shift, I battled the problem of being naked. I wiped a tear from my eyes as I stared at the shreds of one of the few clothes I had, a simple blue dress that Celeste got me last year. My bra and panties too had shredded up, my slippers missing some parts. Without the fur of a wolf, I grew cold quickly, standing stark naked in the woods on a cool night. With a hand covering my breasts and the other covering my nether region, I dashed out of the woods at lightning speed, hoping and praying not to run into anyone. I hadn't completed my prayer when I smacked into someone, the last person I wanted to see in a state of undress. "Hey, watch," the words died in Lucian's throat as he put his hand on my shoulder, trying to scold me for running into him. I wrenched out of his hold with all my might, flying into the pack house and racing to my room in the basement, my skin hot all over and my eyes stinging. He saw me naked. I hurried into faded jeans and a big shirt as if putting on clothes in record speed would negate the effect of having intrusive eyes on me. I wished I could scrub the look in his eyes from my memory. I wish I could wash off the sense of exposure, of being bared. I wanted to scrub it all off, but I couldn't, so I settled for dressing in the blink of an eye and huddling beneath the covers of my bed. Every bone, tissue and cell in me jammed, freezing when my new, heightened senses picked up his scent. Without meaning to, my body began to shake as if I'd been submerged in snow and pulled out to be sprayed with ice water. Hey, I felt his weight on my bed, sinking the already flat bed. I closed my eyes, wishing he wouldn't do this, wishing he would avoid me the way I wanted him to avoid me, but he didn't. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder. I jerked away from it, still hiding underneath my covers. He'd seen me exposed. I didn't think I could face him anytime soon, but he'd come seeking me out, knowing I would be embarrassed. Where were his friends? When would the jeers start? Had he taken a picture? No, he couldn't have, but the impossible became possible with Lucian. "You shifted. Congrats." I still didn't answer him. I couldn't even pretend to be asleep as my body vibrated violently against the bed. It was because of him. He couldn't pretend not to know that his presence made me uncomfortable, but I guess he didn't care about that. After a long silence with me wishing he would leave, he pulled off the cover from me head, exposing me. Are you still afraid of me? He asked, his eyes on my chest. Even dressed, he still looked at me as if he could see my naked body. I looked at my shirt to be sure it didn't have a hole in it. You grew up. He swallowed. I frowned at the thickness of his words and the weird look in his eyes. Please leave. I managed to push his hand off my shoulder as I spoke in a quiet voice. Was I still afraid of him? He humiliated me in front of the whole school, rejected me, cursed at me and bullied me. I didn't have the physical strength to fight him. I didn't have the mental strength to heal from the injuries he never apologized for. I was powerless against him, so yes, I was afraid. Especially now with his eyes roaming my body, making me feel even more exposed than I did with my private parts open. I just want to talk. I didn't want to talk, but it didn't matter. I made mistakes that I'm not proud of, but maybe we can have a fresh start. Stop looking at me like that. I wanted to scream at him. It made me feel disgusting, but I didn't have it in me that night to say anything. I accepted your rejection, I muttered to my legs as his hungry eyes ravaged my body. We haven't mated with anyone else. We can reverse it in a few minutes. I shivered at his callous words. Mates rarely ever rejected each other. I mean, they were sacred, but if you're someone like Lucian, a strong wolf, future beta of a strong pack and a drop-dead gorgeous man, refusing a traitorous latent omega mate made sense. When mates rejected each other, they broke the sacred bond of the goddess, but the goddess loved mate bonds so much that she made a loophole for rejection. The loophole was sex. If I did it with Lucian, the bond he broke by rejecting me would begin to form again. He could mark me during the act and I would be bound to him for life. The alpha's call saved me from the unwanted heat in his eyes. We'd both shifted now, so we couldn't avoid an alpha's call. Chapter 8. It's no secret that the alpha pack has taken up residence amongst us. As Alpha Xavier spoke, a few members of the alpha pack walked by without sparing him a glance. No, it wasn't a secret. It's also no secret what they want. A few people began muttering as Alpha Xavier drew out his speech, keeping us all in suspense. Everyone already went into hiding, but he called us all out of hiding. For what? A speech without a head or tail. The two girls behind me fidgeted, tapping their feet and holding on to each other as the entire shifted wolves in the pack gather in the arena in response to the second alpha's call of the night. I had a brief conversation with him and we agreed on a method that will save us from war. He took a deep, stuttered breath, his loud voice subdued as he spoke. It made the wolf in me lower her head, placing a paw across her eyes at the weakened state of our alpha. In less than 24 hours, another alpha came to throw our lives on its head and made our alpha quiver as he spoke, his hands balled into fists with his gaze trained far, unseeing into the crowd. He lost before the battle even started. I will fight Prince Valens. Murmurs exploded around us, growing louder with each moment that passed, with Alpha Xavier waiting for us to calm down. I will fight. Not he will fight. Alpha Xavier already gave up his rights to this pack. His alpha pride didn't delude him into thinking he could take on the werewolf prince and succeed. You can't fight him. Someone from the crowd shouted and everyone joined in. Prince Valens is a conqueror. Another person inputted. You will lose. You can't gamble with our lives like that. What will happen to us when you lose? We don't want another alpha. Everyone had something to say. Together people poured out their displeasure at the alpha's choice. Secretly, I applauded him. Everyone else was too scared to admit it, too scared to see the sense Alpha Xavier put into this negotiation, but I applauded him for it. He was giving up his position as the alpha of Red Bull, and willingly too, because there was no way in heaven, earth or hell that he would win against Prince Valens in one-on-one combat. Most packs that he invaded chose to fight as a pack to stop the invaders, but they all lost. Every single time. As we would too if our alpha charged us to drive out the invaders that had casually taken over our homes. I cannot gamble with your lives. The alpha exclaimed, his sharp words cutting off the mutterings and exclamations. I'm your alpha. I am responsible for your protection. I can't have my people hiding out forever in their land. The earlier we do this, the earlier we can start our new lives. I refuse. This is nonsense. Beta Osiris exclaimed, drawing attention away from the alpha. If you fight and lose, he will become the rightful alpha of Red Bull. Red Bull is yours. The people are yours, the grounds are yours. The fucking air in this place belongs to you. Why let another man steal it from you? Even from where I stood, I saw the redness in his cheeks and the pursing of his thin lips. We will fight behind our alpha for what is ours. He beat his chest, once then again. That is a touching speech, Osiris, but I'm not giving you a choice here. I am still the alpha. My word is law. I won't risk my wolves to maintain my position. Aren't you concerned what he would do to us when he becomes alpha? Skylar's angry voice called from behind. I turned, as did many people, to see her wipe tears off her cheeks with Lucian by her side. I shivered at the look in his eyes when I faced him. He is a wicked man. He could slaughter us the minute you hand over. Murmurs broke out again, loud enough to drown the alpha's voice. In truth, if Prince Valens wanted to slaughter us, even an underground sanctuary wouldn't stop him. Thinking of the prince made me shiver. His presence alone had scared the wolf out of me. I swallowed down cold fear. What about me? If you hand over, what will I inherit? Bethel shouted from behind. People turned to look at him and they all forgot about their annoyance with the alpha. Foolish boy. Your sister would make a better alpha. Is that what you're thinking of at a time like this? Succession. You need a pack to inherit anything. Close your mouth, child, and hide your stupidity. An old woman interjected before Alpha Xavier called us back to order. I have made my decision. Prince Valens agreed to stay out of the pack house until the battle, which will be this evening. He took another stuttered deep breath. By 6 in the evening, whoever is interested can come out to watch the battle for leadership. I swallowed down my pity for him. Alpha Xavier's reign had been the toughest in our history. First, an inside coup, then having to lead alone and raise his kids alone, and now, an invasion from an unstoppable pack. I hated the man, but I took off my cap to respect his decision. On a final note, whatever happens, whether I remain alpha or he wins the fight, I urge you all to take the results without complaint. People broke into shouts again, but not for long. Prince Valens assured me they'll leave if he loses, and I promised him my pack would honor his leadership if I lose. I ask that you don't make my promise a lie by being strong-headed. In the end, we all trudged back to our homes after the alpha's speech, our heads downcast and feet dragging. We'd heard the first crow of the cock for the day, but even after staying awake throughout the night, no one yawned as we moved. Along the way, a lot of people diverted to the sanctuary while the rest of us continued to the pack house. I went down to my room to sleep off the hectic, crazy day, but like everyone else in the pack, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours until I gave up on sleep, picking up one of the few books I still owned from school to read a bit. My mind kept straying to what the alpha said and what it could mean for me. I'd shifted now so I didn't run the risk of being pushed out of the pack by the new alpha. Most packs didn't tolerate latent wolves. Alpha Xavier only kept me around despite my deficiency to torment me and use me as a pack slave. After all, he would need to pay someone a hefty fee to do the work I did. That person would also need sick leaves and breaks, which I didn't get. In the end, I slammed my book closed to take a walk around the small woods behind the pack house. There I met a man built like a bear, even bigger than the prince himself. No need to run. He had a deep and calming voice devoid of emotions and warmth. His dark eyes, when I dared stare into, were cold and lifeless, like a man who'd given up on the world. I was just leaving. I said nothing as he left, carrying the stench of power with him. Beta Jabari, the prince's best friend and Beta, cursed to wander the world with his master and the rest of his people. He was a strange man, as strange as he was reckless. I wandered the pack lands for a long time. All the shops were closed. No one walked the street at mid-noon, and the skies looked wary as the world prepared for a battle that would change the lives of 120,000 wolves, both old and young. I didn't make it back to the arena as fighting didn't appeal to me, but I felt the searing burn in my chest as Prince Valens fell Alpha Xavier and took the mantle of leadership from him, making Red Bull the 47th pack he'd conquered in his lifetime. I doubled over at one of the benches at Silver Square, the pain of a breaking bond sending me to my knees. In a flash, it ended and Alpha Xavier stopped being my alpha. Chapter 9. A new week came with a new administration. I hadn't set eyes on Alpha Valens, but I saw the changes. One by one, his men filled every top spot in the pack. Beta Jabari became the pack Beta. A new witch who we didn't know became the pack's oracle. His men replaced the head warriors of each brigade, and Skylar didn't step on people as much as she used to. Alpha Valens, in a rare show of mercy, banished Alpha Xavier from the pack lands rather than kill him as any other Alpha would have done in a takeover. Skylar and Bethel refused to leave with their father to become rogues or solitary wolves, so the Alpha left alone, shamed and disgraced, with his pack watching forlornly. None of this affected me in any way. All the changes happened at the top, and people like me at the bottom weren't affected in any way. People like Skylar and Lucian suffered, but people like me who never had relevance or status still had no relevance or status after the violent takeover. I only pitied Celeste as her parents had to move out of the house the pack availed the Beta and his family. They lived in the pack house now, so we spent more time together. More time wasn't a lot, as I still had my duties to carry out. Hey, you. I turned, already used to people addressing me with everything bar my name. To my surprise, the new chef who made the Alpha's meals hadn't been referring to me but Skylar, who'd been passing by. Me. Skylar placed her hand on her chest, looking behind her in surprise. All of us in the kitchen paused to observe what was happening. Who else would I be referring to? Get in here. The woman made a gesture with the spoon in her hand, splashing oil about. You've wandered in here 3 times already. I take it you have nothing to do, so I will give you work. Skylar came back into the kitchen with a confused frown on her face. Even though her father wasn't the Alpha anymore, we all deferred to her by default, used to doing so for the 19 years we'd known her. No one from the Alpha pack disrespected the former Alpha's children. In fact, the 30 or so men that remained after the takeover didn't disrespect anyone. The men neither mingled nor tried to converse with anyone from Redville. They kept to themselves even during breakfast in the pack house where everyone ate together. The men sat at one end of the table and no one sat close to them. They conversed amongst themselves, no one daring to butt into their conversations. Sometimes they laughed out loud, but their jokes were shared between themselves and no one else. I can't cook. Skylar spat when Beta Astrid handing her a spoon to stir the mix on fire. At this age, shame on you. She grabbed the spoon from Skylar and gave it to another girl. Wash the dishes. That requires 0 talent. She turned back to her own duty. Hurry. She barked at Skylar, who had no choice but to comply. Beta Astrid spoke with a defined authority. I suppose after years of following her Alpha about and conquering with him, she had no time for nonsense or petty talk. She cooked all the food the Alpha pack ate, with the rest of us assisting her. They were just 30-something wolves, but she cooked more than half the quantity we cooked for the whole pack house just for her wolves. Skylar spilled some water on the ground as she washed the plates with unnecessary aggression. A spoon went flying at her head from behind. She moved just in time to avoid the attack from Beta Astrid. Some of the girls giggled as the spoon sailed into the sink. Are you a child? You cannot cook, you cannot wash the dishes, but you can eat. Do you want me to ban you from eating anything from this kitchen? She snarled at Skylar. I. Skylar looked on the verge of tears, angry tears. I snickered at her helplessness. A short while ago, that used to be me stuttering at her hands. She raised her head and shot me a stern glare before she stomped out of the room with curses following her. Take it easy on her. She's the Alpha's daughter, Monica said to Astrid, her voice low and tight at the insult to Skylar. Monica didn't dare say anything in the kitchen once Astrid came in. As a matter of fact, we all kept mute the moment Astrid bounded into the kitchen each morning to start barking out orders. The woman, although small, was just too terrifying to be taken lightly. You spoil the children. All of you. It is why someone of, how old is she? 17, 18. It is why someone of such an age can neither cook nor clean. Spoilt rotten, I tell you. She roared the last of her words, flipping the fish she was frying with aggression, not minding the hot oil that splashed out of the pan. In reality, Skylar was almost 20 years old. After breakfast, I and 2 other Omegas cleaned up the dining room and the kitchen, after which I had to fold the laundry. Most people did their laundry themselves to avoid clothes getting mixed up, but for the past year, it became more sensible for them to bring down a labeled basket which they came back to pick up after I did the laundry. After all, why would they do something themselves when they had the traitorous bitch to slave away doing it? I folded the laundry till it was time to start making lunch. Wiping sweat from my brows, I got out of the laundry room and made my way to the kitchen, only to get snatched from the stairs by strong arms. I screamed. "Shut up. It's me, Bethel," the former alpha's son said as he dragged me out of the pack house to a small shed behind it. He let me go, shoving me to the ground after that. "You're the little bitch who was laughing at my sister, huh?" The hard edge of his boot made contact with my ribs, making me whimper. The chaos in the pack for the past week took some attention away from me, but I'd wondered since, when next I'd take a beating. I didn't have to wait long as Bethel kept kicking me, his hard boot bruising my hand, my chest, my ribs, every part of my body bar my face, which I covered with my hands. "Leave her," Skylar commanded, and Bethel stopped kicking me. I stayed on the ground, my hands still clutching my head and my whole body shaking from the brutal onslaught. Yet again, I found myself on the receiving end of hardship, and I just wished all of these people would drop dead this minute. I wished Alpha Xavier didn't choose to take the coward's way out. I wished there had been a fight. I'd have loved to watch a wolf tear out Skylar's throat. After a minute, she wrenched my hands from my face, forcing me to look into her hate-filled eyes. I'd done nothing to Skylar, but since we were kids, she made it a point to make my life hell. She ridiculed me as a child, but it got worse as we got older, reaching a climax when we entered high school. "Look at me." I was already looking at her, but she held my chin in a steel grip. "Take this." She forced something into my hand. A small velvet pouch. "Put this in Valens' meal this night." What? I felt something cold against my throat. A knife. "Goddess. This is your one chance to prove your worth to this pack. You're worthless, but after what your family did to us, you owe us more than what you could ever repay. This is your chance to clear the filth off your name." She let me go. "If you don't do it, you can be sure of losing that bitch you call your best friend. I'll frame her and we all can watch her rot in the dungeons after the savages in the Alpha Pack take turns using her." She'd chosen the right words to break me and ensure compliance. I'd never bargain with Celeste's life, but those crude words affected me more than the image of her being in the dungeons. I knew what she'd suffered as a child at the hands of a middle school teacher and how much she feared physical contact with men. Goddess, how could one person be so cruel? I didn't know the Alpha Pack, so I couldn't even say if their men were like that or not. But one thing was certain, I wouldn't risk finding out. Celeste had stuck her head out for me a lot of times. I could do the same for her this once. Chapter 10. "What are you doing? Hurry up and take this to the prince," Astrid shouted at me. I stood with the tray shaking in my hands, fear paralyzing me from head to toe. I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. I didn't want Skylar to implicate Celeste because I refused to do it. She'd not rest until she destroyed everything that I was and held dear, so I didn't have any choice but to comply with her wishes if I didn't want something bad happening to my best friend. I took the tray from the kitchen and decided to mix the poison into the drink on the Alpha's tray. This would be the second time I would be delivering his meals to his room in the penthouse of the pack house. I hoped that, like the first time, he wouldn't be around when I entered the room. The suite was dark when I entered, only a small light from an open door illuminated the place. Dropping the tray on a table, I straightened, prepared to run out as the Alpha himself stepped out of the bathroom. My mouth flapped open and closed like a fish when he came out with only a towel on his waist and another drying his hair. I should look away. I should flee as I planned, but my body reacted to his. My eyes stayed glued to his chest, beaded with water and a small splatter of dark hair. It took great discipline to wrench my eyes away from his chest, but then they got fixed on his Adam's apple. He'd stopped drying his hair to observe the Omega that dared come into his room to stare at him like a creep, invading his privacy without concern, but I couldn't pull my eyes away. It was as if a magnetic force held me captive and forced my gaze to stay on his body. He didn't say anything as my eyes followed him, my heart beating faster as he walked towards me with a grip on his towel. No words formed in my head as he brushed past me to the food I just put out on his table. My heart thumped faster. "Mate," a small voice whispered in my head. "He's our mate. He's our mate," Artemis exclaimed when his skin touched mine as he passed. Don't drink that," I exclaimed when he grabbed the drink, his broad back blocking my view of the tray. "It speaks." He turned with a raised eyebrow. "Who are you?" He raised his eyebrows at me as he raised a glass of the poisoned glass to his lips. I flew at him to knock the cup away from his grip, but he caught me, holding the glass away from me. Damn me and my bad reflexes. Don't drink it. It's poisoned. I cried when he still held the glass. I slapped the glass away from his hand after much struggling. It fell to the ground, the red liquid spilling on the plush white rug beneath us. You're trying to poison me. The rest of his words died as a rush of different emotions flittered through his eyes. You have brown eyes. Single quote ellipsis. And the Alpha Prince saw no colors but gray after the wicked witch cursed him. I flew out of the room before he could fling me out. I wrenched out of his grip before I could see the disgust in his eyes. He'd searched for over 100 years, roaming the earth in search of his mate, the only person who could break his curse. It must feel like another curse to him to be mated to someone like me. I couldn't bear another rejection, so I ran. Go to him. Go to our mate. Why are you running? He'd never hurt us. Artemis screamed at me to return to Prince Valens, but I didn't stop running until I got out of the pack house, going down the stairs in record time without taking the elevators. I ran out all the way from the pack house to the streets, bumping into people as they walked by. The evening star was out and people rounded up their business for the day to spend time with their families while I ran without a destination in mind, thinking of nothing but putting space between me and the pack house, me and him. All the while I ran, Artemis kept telling me to go back, to go be with our mate, but she would come back to her senses soon and see why we needed distance between us and the Alpha Prince. Prince Valens. My mate. Just thinking about it made my head swell. Unbelievable. How could it be that the moon goddess, of all the men and women in the world, decided to give me to him? He deserved a strong alpha female who could conquer by his side. Second chance mates were rare. In fact, mates were rare, not to talk of second chances. About 20% of werewolves never found their mates, and more than 30% of werewolves found their mates after they mated with someone else. Only a small percent, let me say 2%, of wolves ever had second chances. It had to do with the small fact that mates rarely ever rejected each other, and even if they did, the other party refused to accept the rejection because accepting a rejection comes with more pain than being rejected in the first place. A rejection is like a bitch slap, while accepting that rejection felt like a blow from a heavyweight champion, a severing of the strings that held mates together. Now that you have run this far, what next? You can't live out here. You have to go back. Artemis kept urging me to return. In truth, I couldn't set up camp outside of a flower shop, but I could delay the inevitable, which I planned on doing by staying out here for a while. I could do with a bit less pain these days. Go back home. The streets are dangerous at night. Artemis took up other tactics to lure me back to the pack house, but I resisted. Prince Valens would reject me, but before I welcomed the pain of another rejection, I would take a walk to clear my head and ruminate on the magnificence of such a discovery. Unfortunately for me, I ran into Skylar and her gang while I walked. Lucian froze when he saw me. I wondered if he forgot to break up with Skylar or if the alpha female didn't allow him to. Well, Skylar ran up to me like an eager child. Did you do as I asked? She demanded while her boys brought up the rear. I did. I turned away from her before she saw the fear in my eyes. I'd done what she asked, but not in the way she asked me to. How could I tell her I failed to poison my mate? Your Prince Valens' mate. Ha. Keep dreaming, loser. That would be her reaction. I wished it was a dream. Is he dead? She demanded. Even if I knew he wasn't dead, even if I knew he didn't take the poison, the idea of him being dead filled me with so much pain, I almost doubled over. What is wrong with you? Answer me. Skylar pushed me when I hunched forward a bit. Someone from behind wrenched her hand off my shoulder. We all froze, then slowly, I turned to see the man behind me. Beta Jabari looked ready to murder Skylar on the spot. His eyes looked like soulless black orbs as they darkened. Let go. You're hurting me. Skylar whimpered as he continued to squeeze her wrist. Bethel and Lucian stepped forward, and to show them who was boss, he tightened his grip further. Do not lay a fucking finger on our Luna. He drew out each word with venom dripping from them as he stared her down. He flung her hand and she exclaimed, "You are lucky I am in a good mood, but try this another time and I swear to the moon and stars, I will make you hate the day you were born." He bowed. After you, Luna. He took a step aside and I had no choice but to walk past. I'm sorry, I said to him when we reached halfway to the pack house. I'm the one who should be sorry. His gruff voice announced. He didn't say anything after that and I didn't have anything to say either, so we kept mute and walked back to the pack house. He held open the door for me as we entered the elevator and he punched in the number for the penthouse. I forced myself not to tap my feet. I forced myself not to fidget as the big man beside me made the elevator feel smaller. The elevator pinged and we were in the penthouse. You found her. Right on time too. Prince Valens walked out of a room as we entered. Did you enjoy your run? Jabari excused us with a bow. Come, little mate, tell me why you poisoned me. While he spoke, all I thought of was his lack of a shirt.